Gonzalez, Mr. Richard Koo, and Mr. Mark Kaplan. We want to welcome you again to this, our meeting. And also we recognize we also have other members from NYCHA, board members and employee management staff. We want to welcome you, as well as also our independent auditors, Deloitte & Touche. We want to welcome you also. Our technical support team, we couldn't have made this possible without you. And again, we thank you and want to welcome you. Those who are viewing publicly, also we welcome you. As we start this morning, we will go straight to our roll call.
Okay, so Mr. Gonzalez.
Present.
Mr. Kaplan.
Present.
Mr. Koo.
Here.
From Deloitte, we have Jill Strohmeyer.
Here.
Darshan Patel. He was there earlier. Johnny Waldschmidt.
Present.
Sorry, I'm here.
Yes. From NYCHA, Anika Lescott.
Present.
Vilma Huertas. Terence Clark.
Present.
I'm present.
Yes, thanks. Okay, myself, Anil. Adam Chukri.
All right, thank you
Okay,
very
we can
much.
start the meeting.
Yes, thank you very much, Anil. We have a very moderate agenda this morning.
I'm sorry.
And our agenda, as shown on the screen, we will have first the approval of our audit committee minutes. Then we have Deloitte will be presenting the status update of the audits and also a status update for the
Excuse me, was Mr. recognized?
Getting a feedback here.
I got that. I'll get rid of it. Okay.
All right.
Here I am.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Terence Clark, before
Yes.
you continue, please also recognize that Mr. Lesnoy is on.
Okay, yes, sorry about that. My humblest apology. Welcome, Mr.
I'm sorry also,
Lesnoy.
Mr. Lesnoy is here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Anil, and welcome, Mr. Lesnoy. Now, as we go through our agenda, before we begin, I want to entertain a motion for the approval of our minutes from our board member, Mr. Gonzalez or Kaplan or Mr. Koo.
So moved.
That's been moved. We have a second?
Second.
Okay, may the record so reflect that. All right, thank you very much. We're now gonna move right into Deloitte status update for 2020, the comprehensive annual financial report of NYCHA Public Housing Preservation 1 and also NYCHA Public Housing Preservation 2. Gonna ask Jill Strohmeyer and Darshan to proceed in this regard.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Deloitte began our year-end audit procedures for the Housing Authority, which includes the Housing Authority and its 2 LLC component units. Last month, we started our year-end procedures, and so I would like to take you through this slide deck today to discuss where we are today, completed procedures, what's ongoing, and then next steps as we complete our audits in June. Move to the next slide. So this slide details what we have as a team completed so far today. We have assessed the Deloitte team's independence. So prior to any Deloitte professional performing any audit procedures for the authority, we assess whether or not that individual is both independent fiscally as well as personally as far as relationships go with the entity. We have completed those independence procedures, in accordance with both AICPA standards as well as GAO standards, and everyone serving on this account this year has been deemed independent. We have also updated our understanding of the Housing Authority in discussion with management, noting no significant changes from prior year, really meaning we haven't noticed any new lines of business or spin-offs of any type of revenue streams, things of those nature at this point in time. We do understand that there have been some real estate transactions which we will be testing this year, but other than that, no significant changes in the organization from prior year. We also have updated our understanding of the control environment, noting no significant changes from prior year. As many of you remember, we performed this audit virtually last year, and unfortunately, nothing has changed, and management is performing many of their control functions remotely, and we're performing our audit remotely again this year. We have been informed that there have been some enhancements to internal controls this year, particularly in the finance and treasury department. We have determined materiality for each of the 3 audits. I will say that our materiality calculation this year is similar to our calculation from last year. The benchmark that we use to determine our materiality is the same. We use expenses to determine our materiality, and we're applying the same percentage factor to that benchmark to determine the ultimate materiality numbers. That process has been completed. The team has performed preliminary analytical procedures on account balances. What this means is that we're taking current year account balance information and we're comparing it to prior year account balance information, and we're looking for any significant fluctuations or variances. And if we do see such significant variances, we're having further discussions with management to understand the reason why an account balance may significantly fluctuate, whether up or down. In addition to performing the analytical procedures, we're also performed scoping procedures, determining which account balances we will be testing this year. There are 2 aspects of our scoping process. One relates to a quantitative review and the other related to a qualitative review. Quantitative just means that an account balance is large compared to our materiality. And so typically quantitatively material account balances we do look at each year. And then qualitatively, there may be an account balance that may not be large in comparison to materiality, but may have other factors that we consider to be important, such as complexity of the account, large volume of transactions, susceptibility to error or fraud. And so we would then also scope in those balances. We have completed that scoping process, and we have determined which account balances are both significant from a qualitative and quantitative perspective. The team has prepared audit confirmations and sent them to the respective parties, whether internal or external. Those areas relate to legal confirmations, cash, investments, and debt. The team has received and read the meeting minutes of the board of directors and the audit committee. We read those minutes to understand if there are any transactions or events that have occurred throughout the year that could impact what we do as your auditors. In the read of those minutes, we did note the real estate transactions, for which of course we are planning procedures to test those transactions. We also did note in the read of those minutes that there was a new service provider related to claims management, which we will then assess further to determine whether or not that service provider is relevant to our audit. The Deloitte team has held meetings with our internal specialists. We use a number of specialists on this engagement. IT specialist, pension, other post-employment benefits and claims. We have had separate internal meetings with each of those groups of specialists to determine what this year's scope will look like and the procedures that the specialists will perform for the audit team. And then last, we have had our required risk and fraud discussions with key members of management. Those discussions took place last week, and we held discussions with the chair, the general manager, CFO, controller, the internal audit team, as well as other members of management. Next slide. So some procedures that are in process really relates to what I call our testing. We spend a lot of time testing internal controls and the actual account balances. And that's where we are today. We're in the process of testing your internal controls, which include both your business process controls, as well as your your information technology controls. While we don't issue an opinion on internal controls like you may see in a publicly traded company setting, we are required as your auditors to review your controls and test the design and implementation of such controls. And then we are also testing the following account balance areas. So we have started our testing of cash and investments, capital assets, which includes any construction in progress and asset retirement obligations, receivables, prepaid expenses, accounts payable and accrued expenses, pension and OPEB liabilities, claims, tenant revenue and unearned revenue, subsidies and grants, long-term debt, expense testing, and then journal entries as well. All of these areas are in process. Next slide, please. So what's next? We're going to, of course, complete the testing on the previous slide. Later this month, I know we're almost at the end of April, but we're hoping later this month or early May, we will begin our testing of the real estate transactions. Then next month, we will also begin our testing of GASB 49, the environmental and pollution remediation liabilities, which includes the lead paint assessment. Management is currently in the process of completing their work and their review of this liability, and then we will come in and test next month. We will also test the consolidation and elimination entries next month. These are the entries or transactions, I should say, that occur between NYCHA and the two component units, LLC 1 and LLC 2. Those type of related party transactions are eliminated at the consolidated level. So we will test those entries next month. In addition, we will test the cash flow statement for each of the entities. We will do an in-depth review of the financial statements, making certain that information agrees from general ledger and trial balance to the actual financial statements. And we will start our testing of the footnote disclosures. We will also draft the management representation letter that will be signed by management at the conclusion of our audits. Then moving into June, we will test the going concern assumptions, test subsequent events, so anything that may have occurred from January 1, 2021 through our issuance date in June. And then we will also obtain any legal letter updates from internal and external counsel prior to us issuing our report in June. And then the timeline, we do anticipate our second level review partner to begin his review at the end of May or early June. Every audit report that Deloitte issues goes through a second partner review. It doesn't just stop with the team. We also have an independent individual at the partner level review the financial statements and key audit work papers prior to us releasing our report. It's just a part of our system of quality control. So that process, as mentioned, will start end of May, early June. In mid-June, we will also be back meeting with you to present the results of our audit. That you will receive Deloitte's governance letter, which you have seen before, which outlines if we have any findings, whether there were any control deficiencies, any audit adjustments that were posted and made by management. Those type of items, if there are any, will be communicated to you at the June meeting. And we anticipate being in a position to issue our reports on the financial statements at the conclusion of the June 17th, 2021 meeting. So I'll pause there for a minute just to ask the committee members if they have any questions for Deloitte regarding our progress to date on the financial statement audit before I move into the single audit status.
Jill?
Yes.
Yeah, hi. Could you give me an example of how you test the tenant revenue and the other revenue portion? An example of how that the methodology that you use to test the tenant revenue?
Sure. So we're getting a file of all of the tenants, tenant rolls, so to speak. And we're making a selection of samples, and we're asking then for, let's say it's 15 samples. We're then asking that management at the developments typically provide us with those tenant files to support the revenue calculation. And then we're looking at the documentation in that tenant file and performing the recalculation of that revenue as well to make certain that it was calculated correctly.
But you take only a sample of the developments for this?
We do take a sample. Yes, we take a sample. So we take all of the tenants across all developments and we make a sample, and then we ask for tenant files for the samples that we selected.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jill, can you hear me?
I can. How are you?
Okay. Hi. All right. So listen, I was going over some of the minutes from the last meeting, and so I want to move forward and kind of address some of the things that were on there. For example, there was the part of the remediation of the lead testing where you selected 26 of the issues to look at, but only 23 were able to give you the information that you needed. So my question to you is, will the remaining 3 be cleared now, or have they been fixed since our last meeting, or is this part of the agenda for the new information?
Mr. Gonzalez, we have not began our testing yet related to this year's work of the pollution and remediation liability, which includes a lead paint assessment.
Right.
So we will start that process next month. So perhaps at the June meeting, I can provide an update on this matter. On
those 3, okay. Okay, and so another thing that I would like for you to check into is that there was a statement, and it's regarding the abatement. It says abatement will be accelerated only if when a complaint goes in to the New York City Department of Health regarding levels of lead in a child under 6. So what happens if it's not reported to the New York City Department of Health? I thought it was supposed to move forward regardless once it's been reported that there is a child under 6 in the unit.
Maybe, I think maybe management might be in the best position to answer this question. I don't know if NYCHA or Jeff can answer.
Mr. Gonzalez, can you please just repeat the question for us?
Okay. There's a statement that says, with regards to abatement, if abatement is accelerated only if a report, when a complaint goes to the New York City Department of Health regarding levels of lead in a child under 6. So is that to say, if it's not reported yet, you've been advised that a child under 6 lives in the unit, then what? How do we proceed there?
I'm not sure that I fully understand the question, so I'll do my best. And if I don't answer your question, please let me know.
Okay,
So
go ahead.
if we do the XRF testing, well, first of all, when we started to XRF test the units last year in 2020, we started with the units with children under 6 per the HUD mandates. So we started with that universe, and depending on what we found, we remediated or abated the unit. I don't know if I understand your second part of your question very well.
Well, basically what I'm saying is this. Okay, so it's expedited when it's reported.
Correct.
Okay, so let me put it in this sense. So you've had units that have converted to the Section 8.
Right.
Now, the XRF testing took place in these units, but the abatement was never done.
I would have to speak with our lead team and get back to you on that. I
Right.
don't know that I'm the best person to answer that question, but I do know that there are people at NYCHA who deal with this work specifically, and they can sort of provide the flow chart of how they handle that issue, particularly with RADPACT, because I think that's the heart of what you're asking, right?
Right, because again, it basically, I had spoken to Razul earlier,
Okay.
and you know, the PRC, the management company that is now currently at Wise, were trying to make appointments with us to come into our apartments to do the abatement where their testing facility found lead.
Correct.
In an apartment with a child under 6. My concern was then what happened to the XRF testing that NYCHA did before we converted and there was no abatement done.
I will check in with Rasul because I do think
Right.
he's the best person to answer that question. And I will make sure we get you something in writing through Vilma.
Please, please. And just remind them that some of the findings did state that there were children under 6 in apartments where there was lead found.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for explaining that.
All right. Now back to Jill. Jill?
I'm here, yes.
Okay. So now I have a question, and I don't know if this is the section to ask it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. You know, when you do the audit on the internal auditors and the different subjects that they have, right, to address, is there a timeline imposed on when they should finish it so that there are no lingering audit reports need to be done when we move into where you report to us the findings, and then they have to linger into the next time we talk about it, or no? Or are they just left open?
So I would say that Deloitte doesn't independently audit your internal audit department. Deloitte does work with your internal audit department. We have discussions with your internal audit department. We read all of the reports that are issued by the internal audit department. And we do that as part of our risk assessment procedures, because we do want to know if your internal audit has uncovered or has identified an issue or has a severe finding that could impact the financial statements, we do want to understand that and know about it, because then we tailor our procedures accordingly. So that's how the internal audit department and Deloitte work together. It's really us having communication, understanding what they've done from a financial aspect, and if there's any findings that significantly impact what we do.
Okay, all right. So basically you're telling me that the only ones that you can actually work with are the ones that have completed their tasks. And then I would have to speak to someone at NYCHA with regards to the internal audits that weren't completed.
And are you saying, meaning the report wasn't issued, or are you referring to when there's been a finding that needs to be remediated and the remediation hasn't been completed?
Well, it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of both.
Any report that's been issued, regardless of whether or not the remediation has occurred, we have received a copy and have read. And consider that as part of what we do. If the internal audit report has not been completed and issued, then Deloitte would not have received a copy of that.
I see. Okay, so then we meaning the audit committee, will have to go back to management and find out what is still needed in order to complete these audits, so that it doesn't linger into next year or the next cycle or what have you. I just want to be clear on that. Okay. Now, the last thing is,
Mr. Gonzalez, you do have internal audit on the line right now. So I don't know if there's specific ones or if they could even just give you an update on their process. I think they'd be appropriate to answer that question. So Terrence, do you want to jump in?
Thank you. The internal audit department, presently, we have at least 10 reports which are in the reporting stage. We call it reporting stage because final reviews are being done at this time. And so in short order, we can have these reports subject to the completion of the reviews. These reports will be made available to the committee and also to the external auditors.
Right, so you said 10, well, out of how many?
10, Vilma, I heard it. Okay,
Yeah.
10
So
out of
I think let's just take a step back here. I think I mentioned this before, board member and audit committee member. There is a process, right? There is a risk assessment that's conducted yearly, whereby the audit committee presents an audit plan to the audit, the audit department presents an audit plan for that year to the audit committee. You have reviewed it. You recommend for approval to the board approves it, and then the audit department starts their reviews based on that plan. Sometimes things get moved, either because there's another priority project that we were asked to look at, or because, let's say, it may not make sense to proceed after the audit plan was approved with that particular audit. For example, right now they're looking at the plan that was adopted because we had COVID. So some audits may not make sense to proceed with this year because COVID was such an unusual situation that's not going to, if they do that audit, it's not going to be reflective of what they're really looking at and trying to see, because there have been so many unusual situations and circumstances that have come out of us having to deal with COVID, right? So, yeah. So and in any audit plan, there will always be in various stages, right? If you adopt 40, a plan that has 40 audits, you're not going to get all 40 audits done at the same time, right? Everything will be in various stages.
Right.
Of the audit.
Right. So let me rephrase the question. So let's say we go in and we got 40 audits to begin with. This was the plan. Yep. Now, midway through that plan, let's say 30 of those audits, and I'm being generous, were completed. Now, so what happens to the other 10? It goes into limbo?
Again, some of them may not be completed. Some of them may be deferred. Some of them it may not make sense to proceed with because of circumstances that may have arisen. In this instance, it may be COVID, right? Because of what the intended scope of that audit was for, right?
Right.
So at this point, it may not make sense to proceed, right?
So is it shelved and then brought back at a later date?
It depends on the scope. Some may not, it may not make sense to go forward with it at a later time. Some it may, depending on what the scope was. And as soon as we get back to some normalized type of operations.
I see.
Mhm.
So we will just have to wait and see what happens.
That can happen in any year, okay? Different circumstances can arise, right? That can happen at any time.
Okay.
May I make a suggestion?
Yeah, sure.
Should we, the audit committee, have a separate meeting with Mr. Clark and his team to review the status of those internal audits?
You will not be able to do it as collectively as a committee unless you're doing it at a public meeting. And if that's the case, then we would have to schedule an audit committee meeting, just so that we don't create a quorum issue.
Well,
We can have
okay.
individual meetings and apprise you of the status, if that is what you're looking for, we can do that. If not, we would have to schedule a separate meeting.
Okay.
Okay,
All right. So let me take that up with our chair, Victor, later.
sure. No problem.
Okay. All right. Now, one last thing, and then I'm done with my questions. Also, in the report, the minutes, there was a reference to a Gatsby statement 95 in 2020 that caused delays, and according to our controller, we haven't considered or adopted that Gatsby. So what effect does that have whether we use it or not?
Hello, Victor. This is Jeff Lesnoy. I'll
Hi.
respond to that. So GASB 95 was a specific statement from the GASBs which provided for an extension of all GASBs which were effective into the next 12 to 18 months into the future. So as a result of that, there are no GASBs, new GASBs that we are implementing effective for the year 2020. In 2021, we will have several. And in 2022, we'll have a big one, which relates to the lease accounting change. But at this point in time, there's no action that's required by NYCHA.
Okay. Okay, just wanted to be clear. Thank you. That's it for me.
All right, Jill, you want to continue?
Sure, next slide, if I could. So now we'll provide you with a status update related to the single audit. So just to refresh everyone's memory, NYCHA does have a single audit because NYCHA receives significant funding from federal awarding agencies, and you have significant federal expenditures in a given year. So if NYCHA has federal expenditures that exceed $750,000, and because you're a governmental organization, you're required to have a single audit. There are 3 reports that we will plan to issue as part of the single audit. The first will be our independent auditor's report in accordance with government auditing standards. The second is our report over internal control over financial reporting and compliance in accordance with government auditing standards. And the third opinion is really our opinion on your federal programs that are in scope for testing this year. There is also a small agreed upon procedures report that we will also issue as part of the single audit related to the Real Estate Assessment Center, or REAC. I believe it was last month, the Office of Management Budget, OMB, did extend a 6-month extension on the due date for your single audit submission. In a normal year, NYCHA single audit submission would be due 9 months after your fiscal year end, or September 30th in your case. With this 6-month OMB extension, your 2020 single audit is now considered due in March of 2022. However, in discussions with management at this point, management does anticipate to use part of that extension, not the full 6 months, but 3 months, and plans to have the single audit ready for issuance in December of 2021. This timeline is the same as it was last year. So the timing of the single audit compares to 2019. Next slide. We have received a preliminary CFA from management at this time. The CFA is short for the Schedule of Federal Expenditures and Awards. If you can see on the screen, and I apologize for the small print, but at this point in time, this schedule shows that NYCHA has approximately $3.3 billion in total federal expenditures for 2020. And as you can see on the slide, it's various federal awarding agencies that make up that $3.3 billion. Next slide. The first step that we undertake as your auditors related to the single audit is to determine which of those programs listed on the previous slide we will test. And we as your auditors follow guidance within the uniform guidance issued by the Office of Management Budget. So the first step in the process is to determine which of these major programs is a type A program and which of these programs is a type B program. So we have to develop a threshold to determine type A, type B. Uniform guidance states that we have to apply a 0.3% to your total expenditures to determine our type A threshold. So we have done that, and we have determined that this year our type A threshold is approximately $9.9 million. Any program in which you expended more than $9.9 million is considered a type A program. Type A really means your largest programs. Type B, we then apply 25% to the type A threshold to determine type B, which we have calculated this year as approximately $2.5 million. Any program where you had expenditures between 2.5 million and 9.9 million is considered a type B program. We have gone through that process and determined which of the programs are type A, which one are type B. And from there, we have then performed a risk assessment on all of your type A programs and all of your type B programs. We are required to test any type A program which we have not tested in the last 2 years. And we do have to test at least one type B program each year. After we have completed that process of determining which type A and type B programs are in scope, we have determined that we will be subjecting to testing this year $2.9 billion of your total $3.3 billion as part of our single audit, which is approximately 88% of the total federal expenditures this year. Going to the next slide, these are the major programs, the type A and the type B programs that we will be looking at this year. The Community Development Block Grants Entitlement Grant, CFDA 14.218. This is scoped in this year because we have not audited in the last 2 years. And so it's a type A program, so it's one of your larger programs. We have not looked at it in the last 2 years. Therefore, it automatically is in scope this year. Next is the Public Housing CARES Act funding, CFDA 14.PHC. This is in scope this year because it is new. It has CARES Act funding, which we all know is new in 2020. And because we've never audited it before, it's in scope this year. Next is the housing voucher cluster, which is comprised of the Section 8 housing vouchers, choice vouchers, as well as the mainstream vouchers. This is a cluster, and this is in scope this year. We have audited this in the past. It was 2018 that we've audited last. However, because of the size of this, we did have to, for scoping purposes, consider this a major program again this year. The next one is the HCV CARES Act funding, CFDA 14.HCC. This is another new CARES Act funding. We've never audited before, so we are looking at it for the first time this year as an in-scope program. And then last but not least is the Public Housing Capital Fund Program, CFDA 14872. We test this every year. We're required to test this every year because there's a closeout component related to this. And so every year, this is something that we're required to look at. We have started the single audit procedures. Darshan Patel on the line here today is our single audit specialist. We have began making requests for populations to determine which samples we'll be testing. And so we do anticipate getting through a good chunk of our audit work before the end of June, and then ultimately complete the rest of our procedures over the summer and into the fall ahead of the December submission deadline. So at this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions related to our single audit. If none, Terrence, that concludes my prepared remarks on Deloitte's status of the 2020 audits.
All right, thank you very much, Jill. Really appreciate this. All right. Do we have any further comments at this time? There are no further comments, then we can entertain at this time a motion for the adjournment. There are no other matters to be discussed.
Hi, this is Anika. I do have one matter that's not on the agenda, but I hope that you will allow me to just share this with the audit committee members. So we were notified on Monday that NYCHA received the Government Finance Officers Association Award for Excellence in Financial Reporting. And this certificate of achievement is the highest form of recognition in governmental accounting and financial reporting, and its attainment represents a significant accomplishment by government and its management. So we received that award for our 2019 financial statements, and I just wanted to share that with all of you to thank you for your work. And thank you for supporting us as we went through that process, and also Jeffrey Lesnoy for his leadership.
All right. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Very good.
And let's hope we continue that trend going forward. All right. Any other business before we entertain a motion for adjournment?
Motion, so move.
That's been moved by Mr. Victor. Second, thank you. It's so recorded. Thank you all very much for coming out. This brings to an end the audit committee meeting for April 22 of the New York City Housing Authority. It's now 10:52 and the meeting is now closed. Thank you all, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, take care, Neil.
Yep, thanks.
We got it done. We got it done.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you all, Euripides and everybody. Thank you all for making this possible.
Have a good one, everyone. Be safe.